He left home for a quiet walk. Minutes later, his freedom vanished. An innocent man, trapped in a nightmare. What if one wrong turn stole your entire life? One moment you're free, laughing with family. The next, you're branded guilty, your dignity stripped away. He begged the system for mercy. It betrayed him instead. But buried deep in the lies, one truth could ignite his fight back. He wasn't extraordinary, at least not in the way the world defines it. Just a son, a brother, a neighbor you trust with your spare key. His name was Daniel. He dreamed simple, build a steady career, start a family, give his mother the peace she sacrificed everything for. He worked long shifts at a warehouse, grease staining his hands, yet hope steady in his eyes. Every morning, he ran past the corner cafe. Every evening, he phoned his younger sister, reminding her to study harder than he ever could. His world was small, but filled with meaning. He wasn't flawless. Daniel had a temper when pushed, and bills often piled higher than paychecks. But he carried his struggles with quiet resilience. Neighbors respected him. Kids on the block chased after him, laughing, calling him coach when he taught them street ball. In a community often ignored, Daniel became a flicker of light. Yet shadows lurked. Men in uniform prowled the neighborhood, more predator than protector. Daniel learned early, survival meant silence. But silence was never his strength. He spoke against unfair evictions, called out harassment, demanded dignity. That courage, once admired, would soon paint a target on his back. His story was never meant to be small. Destiny was waiting, bigger, darker, and crueler than Daniel could ever imagine. It was an ordinary Thursday. Daniel sipped coffee, kissed his mother goodbye, and walked toward the bus stop. Sunlight bounced off windows. Kids laughed in the park nearby. Nothing hinted that life itself was about to turn on him. Then it began. A sudden shout, a flash of movement, and Daniel was shoved into the wrong alley. Two men in dark jackets, faces hidden, accused him of a crime he didn't commit. He protested. They laughed. Evidence appeared out of nowhere. Security footage doctored. Witnesses coerced. Fear gripped him like iron. The police arrived, their eyes cold, their questions sharp, their sympathy non-existent. Neighbors who once waved now whispered, uncertain. Even journalists who promised truth reported only fragments, twisting them to fit a narrative he couldn't defend. Every door he knocked on, closed. Every plea, ignored. Every document, dismissed. Yet something inside him flickered. A spark. A voice telling him, you are not powerless. He clenched his fists, swore silently, I will not vanish quietly. But the world didn't wait. In court, the judge barely glanced at him. The jury, influenced by media, convicted him within hours. His freedom, his dignity, stripped in a single, brutal sweep. The truth was buried under lies, corruption, and fear. Daniel walked out, handcuffed, broken, branded guilty. Yet in his chest, the spark refused to die. The injustice prevailed. But the fight, his fight, was only beginning. Daniel's world had shrunk to gray walls and harsh fluorescent lights. Each day brought new forms of intimidation, interrogations without counsel, threats whispered in hallways, evidence planted with precision. Even his own fingerprints betrayed him on documents he had never touched. The police who were meant to protect now became the architects of his nightmare. Prosecutors pushed cases with mechanical zeal, ignoring gaps, contradictions, and cries for fairness. The courtroom felt less like justice and more like theater, a performance where Daniel was the villain. Outside, the community split. Neighbors debated in hushed tones. Could he really be guilty? Some still believed him, secretly leaving food at his cell door. Others feared association, distancing themselves to avoid the same fate. Media headlines screamed guilt before trials ended. Reporters painted him as dangerous, reckless, a cautionary tale. Every broadcast was a hammer, each story another nail sealing his reputation. Daniel sank into despair. Isolation gnawed at him. Questions of why me filled the empty hours. But deep within, a stubborn ember refused to die. He remembered the children on his street, the mother who depended on him, the life he had planned. He could not, would not, vanish quietly. And then, one small detail surfaced, almost by accident. A single frame of footage overlooked, a misfiled report, a witness too afraid to speak. It whispered possibility. The spark of hope returned, fragile but persistent. He began to map the lies, tracing corruption through the police, the prosecutors, even the media networks. Every false claim, every coerced testimony, every planted piece of evidence formed a pattern, one that could expose the truth. One detail would later change everything. The walls of injustice were high, but cracks were appearing. Daniel's fight was no longer just about survival. It was about exposing a system built to crush the innocent. Truth could not stay buried forever. The courtroom was suffocating. Whispers echoed off marble walls. Judges glanced at files as if reading someone else's story. Jurors seemed distant, eyes glazed, hearing only what the prosecution fed them. Daniel stood at the center, hands trembling but jaws set. Every contradiction he pointed out was dismissed. Every witness in his favor ignored or shouted down. The law, meant to protect, had become a weapon against him. Outside, his family watched through closed doors. Mothers wept. Sisters clutched each other. Neighbors whispered prayers, hearts heavy with helplessness. The community felt the sting of betrayal as the trial dragged on. The prosecution smiled, confident, each argument a hammer driving him deeper. Evidence fabricated, testimonies coerced, villains seemed unstoppable. Daniel felt crushed. Shame, anger, despair, each emotion collided inside him. Yet beneath the weight, a stubborn pulse remained. He refused to vanish quietly. And then it happened. A witness, previously silenced, stepped forward unexpectedly. Her voice cracked. Her eyes darted nervously. But the words she spoke pierced the courtroom. A small, seemingly insignificant detail. One fact that contradicted the prosecution's entire narrative. A hush fell. All eyes turned. The walls of deception trembled ever so slightly. The villains, confident moments ago, now shifted uneasily. The first crack had appeared. It was fragile, precarious, but it was real. Daniel's fight was far from over. The trial had crushed him physically and emotionally. But the spark of resistance had ignited into a flicker of hope. The corruption around him had weaknesses, and those weaknesses would soon be exploited. The verdict hit like a hammer. Guilty. The courtroom erupted in whispers, gasps, some stifled cries. Daniel's hands shook, but his eyes burned with quiet defiance. Judges, prosecutors, even the media celebrated. They believed the battle was over. They didn't see the storm brewing beneath the surface. Family and friends wept openly, hearts breaking in unison. Neighbors whispered prayers, holding on to fragments of hope. Daniel, crushed yet unbroken, clenched his fists. Every tear, every lie, every injustice fueled a resolve that could not be silenced. Outrage began to ripple. Social media ignited with voices demanding truth. Some journalists questioned the case. Some allies began speaking out, exposing the cracks in a system built on lies. The villains smiled, unaware that their triumph was temporary. Daniel's fight was far from finished. He had been beaten, humiliated, branded guilty. But injustice had only won the battle, not the war. And in that moment, Daniel made a silent vow. He would rise, expose the corruption, and reclaim the life stolen from him. The prison gates closed behind Daniel with a deafening finality. Silence swallowed him. Every step echoed betrayal. Every heartbeat whispered loss. His family struggled to breathe under the weight of shame and grief. Visits were heavy with sorrow, but their eyes searched for the flicker of the man they once knew. Neighbors, once distant, began to rally quietly, leaving notes, sharing food, offering small acts of solidarity. Inside, Daniel faced the monotony of confinement. Days blurred into nights. Every guard's glare, every denied request, reminded him of the injustice he endured. Yet inside, a seed of resistance grew stronger. Outside, the community could no longer ignore the cracks in the system. Blogs, whispers, and hidden footage circulated. Questions surfaced, and some began to demand accountability. Daniel's name became a symbol, not just of what was stolen, but of what could not be destroyed. Hope intertwined with danger, fragile but alive. Even behind bars, he found ways to strategize, to communicate, to plan. The villains celebrated publicly, blind to the movement forming in shadows. They believed they had won, but resilience had taken root. The hero was down, bruised, confined, and marked by trauma. But the story wasn't over. Every injustice endured, every hardship survived, only sharpened his resolve. And somewhere, deep inside, Daniel knew the fight had only just begun. Daniel lost in court, but his struggle ignited something unexpected. Communities began questioning authority, demanding accountability. Journalists risked careers exposing inconsistencies. His family rallied others, refusing to let injustice be forgotten. Though Daniel remained imprisoned, a spark had spread beyond walls. They couldn't win, but they lit a fire for others. Daniel lost in court, but his struggle ignited something unexpected. Communities began questioning authority, demanding accountability. Journalists risked careers exposing inconsistencies. His family rallied others, refusing to let injustice be forgotten. Though Daniel remained imprisoned, a spark had spread beyond walls. They couldn't win, but they lit a fire for others.